My name is Alara Vance. For the better part of my 62 years, I've lived a life stitched together with quiet moments and simple threads. I was a mender by trade, spending my days in a small apartment in Cedar Creek, a town nestled in a valley where the scent of pine and damp earth hangs heavy in the air. My hands, gnarled and pricked by 1,000 needles, knew the art of fixing what was broken: a torn seam, a frayed cuff, the delicate lace of a wedding veil. It was a life of small repairs, of making things whole again. My husband, Robert, had been a gardener, a man whose quiet company I missed more than words could say. He passed 3 years ago, leaving behind a silence in our home that I learned to fill with the hum of my sewing machine and the rustle of fabric. Our son, Liam, was the opposite of our quiet world. He was a force of nature, a builder of empires. From a small startup in his garage, he had built AVI Solutions, a sustainable technology firm that was changing the way people thought about energy. At 36, he was a millionaire, a man whose life was a whirlwind of board meetings, international flights, and strategic acquisitions. I was immensely proud of him, of the world he had built with his brilliant mind and relentless drive. But that world felt very far from my own. Our connection had become a series of brief phone calls, his voice often distant, filtered through the noise of a bustling airport or a corporate dinner. After Robert died, Liam had poured his grief into his work, and I understood. We all mend our broken hearts in our own way. This Thanksgiving, however, was meant to be different. He was coming home, just for the day, and he was bringing his wife, Chloe. For 2 years, I had been navigating the currents of a leaner life, my small savings dwindling, my social security check stretched thin. I told myself it was a temporary tide, that the waters would calm soon. I took on extra mending jobs, my fingers often aching late into the night, and I learned to be creative with my budget, to make a pot of soup last for days. But for Liam's visit, I spared no expense. The scent of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and my grandmother's sweet potato casserole filled my tiny apartment, a fragrant shield against the November chill. The grocery bill would mean a lean week ahead, but the thought of seeing my son's face light up with the familiar tastes of his childhood was worth more than any budget. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed my apron and took a deep, steadying breath. Liam stood on my doorstep, a portrait of success. His cashmere sweater was the color of autumn leaves, his watch a sleek band of silver and steel that likely cost more than my entire apartment's rent for a year. He looked tired but happy, his smile reaching his eyes as he pulled me into a hug that smelled of expensive cologne and the crisp outdoor air. "Mom, it smells incredible in here," he said, his voice a warm rumble that I'd missed so dearly. Behind him stood Chloe, his wife of 3 years. She was a vision in a winter white coat, her blonde hair styled in effortless waves that defied the wind. She smiled her perfect, polished smile, the kind that was always camera-ready, but her eyes, a cool shade of blue, seemed to scan my small living room, taking inventory. "Alara, it's so good to see you," she said, allowing me to kiss her cheek. It felt like kissing a porcelain doll. We settled around my small dining table, the one Robert had built for me from reclaimed oak. I listened as Liam spoke of expanding AVI to Europe, his voice full of the passion and energy that had always defined him. Chloe would chime in with anecdotes about their recent trip to Tuscany, the charming villa they'd rented, the truffle hunting expedition. I nodded and smiled, a loving audience to a life I couldn't quite imagine. Each detail, meant to be shared, felt like another stitch pulling the fabric of our lives further apart. Then, as I brought out the pumpkin pie, its cinnamon sent a final, comforting note to the meal, Liam leaned back in his chair, a contented look on his face. "Mom, there's something I've been meaning to ask," he said, his eyes sparkling with an earnestness that reminded me of the boy he used to be. I set the pie down, giving him my full attention. "How are you enjoying the cottage? I know you always said you wanted to live by the water, just like when you and Dad were first married." The words hung in the air, beautiful and incomprehensible. I felt a jolt, as if a needle had slipped and pricked me straight to the bone. "Cottage." My voice was a faint echo of my own. I looked at him, searching his face for a sign that this was some kind of elaborate joke. "What cottage, honey?" I haven't received any cottage." Liam's smile faltered. His brow furrowed in confusion. He glanced at Chloe, who had gone utterly still beside him, her fork frozen halfway to her plate. "The cottage on Whispering Pines Lake," he said, his voice losing its easy confidence. "I had it transferred into your name for your birthday 2 years ago. Don't you remember, Mom?" I shook my head slowly, a wave of dizziness washing over me. The warm, fragrant air of the apartment suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. Liam, I think I would remember receiving a house. I've never seen a cottage on Whispering Pines Lake. I've never gotten anything like that. Are you sure? Chloe abruptly pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the wooden floor. Her napkin fluttered to the ground. Oh, I just remembered, she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too high. I need to make a quick call about a charity event tomorrow. Excuse me. She hurried toward the kitchen, her phone already in her hand. Her movements were clipped and urgent, a sudden crack in her smooth, composed facade. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Liam was frowning now, the problem solver in him trying to piece together a puzzle with a missing piece. Mom, that's impossible. I had my assistant, Grace, handle all the paperwork. The deed, the keys, everything should have been sent to you. And there were the monthly expense stipends, too. Monthly stipends? I felt my legs grow weak, and I sank back into my chair. The $2,000 a month I've been sending you to help with expenses, he said, his confusion turning to alarm. Grace set up an automatic transfer. She assured me you were receiving everything. The room seemed to spin. $2,000 a month. For 2 years. That was $48,000. A sum so vast, it was almost abstract. It was enough money to have transformed my life. Enough to have bought my blood pressure medication without worry, to have fixed the rattling old car Robert had left me, to have turned the heat up on cold winter nights without staring at the meter. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. Liam, I whispered, my voice trembling. I swear to you, on your father's memory, I have not received a single dollar. I've been mending clothes until my fingers bleed to pay my bills. Last month, I had to choose between a new winter coat and my prescriptions. The color drained from Liam's face. He shot to his feet, his chair screeching back. That's not possible. I have bank statements, transfer confirmations. The records are all there. From the kitchen, I could hear Chloe's voice, a hello, frantic murmur, though I couldn't make out the words. My hands began to shake as the reality of the situation, sharp and cruel, began to pierce through my confusion. Show me, I said, my voice barely audible. Show me the proof. Liam was already on his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, his expression growing more desperate by the second. The physical copies are at the house. The signed deed, the bank account details. Mom, if you haven't been getting this money, then where in God's name has it been going? As if pulled by the same invisible string, we both turned toward the kitchen. Chloe's hushed voice had fallen silent. The silence was thick, heavy with a guilt so palpable I could almost taste it, bitter and metallic like old pennies. I rose on unsteady legs and walked to the kitchen doorway. Chloe stood with her back to us, her phone pressed to her ear, but she wasn't speaking. She was just listening. When she sensed us behind her, she spun around, her face flushed, her eyes wide with a look of pure panic. Everything all right? Liam asked, but the warmth was gone from his voice. It was replaced by the sharp, incisive tone he used in his boardrooms when he smelled a lie. Chloe's smile was a fragile, painted-on thing. Perfectly. Just sorting out a little mix-up for tomorrow's gala. But I could see it then, clear as day. The guilt was etched into the fine lines around her eyes, the nervous way she twisted the large diamond on her ring finger. She couldn't meet my gaze. Chloe, Liam said, his voice dangerously calm. Did you know anything about the cottage? You helped Grace with some of the arrangements around that time, didn't you? The silence that followed stretched into an eternity. Chloe's mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. In that single, stark moment, looking at the terror on her beautiful face, I knew. I didn't know how, and I didn't know why, but I knew that she had taken it. She had taken the cottage, the money, the security my son had tried to give me. The Thanksgiving I had so lovingly prepared, meant to be a bridge across the distance between our lives, was about to become the day my world, and my son's, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The silence in my small apartment was no longer cozy, it was suffocating. Chloe stood trapped in the kitchen doorway, a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truth. Her perfectly manicured hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles shone like polished stones. Liam's gaze was fixed on his wife, his expression a chilling blend of disbelief and dawning horror. Chloe, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the room. Where is my cottage? She swallowed, a small, convulsive movement in her slender throat. Her eyes darted between me and Liam, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. There must be a mistake. A clerical error. The post office loses things all the time. The bank could have gotten the account wrong. The excuses tumbled out, flimsy and transparent. After decades of mending other people's garments, of listening to their stories while I worked, I had become a student of human nature. You learn to spot a weak seam, a shoddy patch job. Chloe was lying, and she was doing it badly. Liam, ever the man of action, pulled out his phone again. I'm calling Grace. She'll have the records on her cloud server. She's meticulous. No, Liam, wait. Chloe stepped forward, a flicker of desperation in her eyes. Let's not bother her on a holiday. We can sort this out ourselves. Your mother is upset. We shouldn't add to her stress with all this confusion. A cold, clear anger began to rise within me, pushing aside the shock. Upset me? I had spent the last 2 years eating bean soup for dinner so I could afford the thread for my mending jobs, while she planned trips to Tuscany. But I kept my voice even. Chloe, dear, I think we are far past the point of worrying about my stress levels. I need to know what happened to the home my son bought for me. Liam was already on the phone. A moment later, a calm, professional voice filled the small room as he switched to speaker. Grace, it's Liam. I apologize for calling on Thanksgiving, but this is urgent. I need you to pull up the file on the Whispering Pines Lake property I purchased for my mother. There was a soft clicking of a keyboard on the other end. Of course, Mr. Vance. One moment. Here it is. The property at 417 Whispering Pines Lane. The deed was transferred to Alara Vance on October 28, 2 years ago. I have a scanned copy of the signed transfer document right here. My heart hammered against my ribs. Alara Vance. That was me. It was my name on a document I'd never laid eyes on. And the monthly stipends? Liam asked, his voice tight. All transfers were successful, sir. $2,000 on the first of each month to the account designated for Ms. Vance. Routing number ending in 5512. The blood rushed from my head. I felt faint. My account ends in 2398, I said, the words coming out in a near whisper. Liam's eyes, cold as chips of ice, locked onto Chloe. Grace, could you please read me the full account number? As Grace recited the string of digits, I watched Chloe's face crumble like a sandcastle against a rising tide. It wasn't my account. It wasn't even the same bank. Grace, Liam said, his voice now dangerously soft. Who gave you that account information? Your wife did, sir. Mrs. Vance called me in early November of that year. She said you had helped your mother open a new, high-yield savings account and that all future transfers should be directed there. She provided the new routing and account numbers and asked me to update the file. The phone in Liam's hand trembled slightly. Chloe let out a small, strangled sound, like a trapped bird. And the deed, Grace, Liam pressed on relentlessly. The physical documents. Where were they mailed? To the address Mrs. Vance provided for her. A private mail service. P.O. Box 714 in the Northwood District. I had never set foot in the Northwood District. Liam disconnected the call, and the silence that descended was absolute, broken only by Chloe's ragged breathing. When he finally looked at his wife, his face was a blank mask, an emptiness more terrifying than any rage could ever be. Explain, he said. The single word was a command, an indictment, and a verdict all in one. Chloe's carefully constructed composure shattered completely. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smearing her expensive mascara. But they were tears of panic, not of remorse. Liam, you have to understand. My parents, they were going to lose everything. Their business failed, my father needed surgery. They were desperate. Desperate? I found my voice, sharp and clear. So you stole from me? No, she insisted, her voice rising in hysteria. I was just borrowing it. I was going to pay it all back. I just needed a little time. And the cottage, it's not like you were using it. My family, they needed a place to live. The sheer audacity of her words struck me like a physical blow. Not like I was using it. Chloe, I have been wearing the same threadbare coat for 3 winters. I've skipped doses of my medication to make the prescription last longer. I've been living in a constant state of anxiety, wondering how I was going to make it through each month. Liam was staring at Chloe as if she were a complete stranger. My mother could have had a heart attack, a stroke. What if she'd had a medical emergency and couldn't afford the care she needed because of you? But she didn't. Chloe pleaded, her logic twisted by self-preservation. She's okay. She's strong. My father has a weak heart. They needed it more. The cruelty of that statement settled the cold anger in my chest into a solid, heavy weight. Okay, strong. I thought of the lonely nights I'd spent worrying, the small humiliations of having to put items back at the grocery checkout, the bone-deep chill of my apartment I couldn't afford to heat properly. Where's my house now? I asked, my voice devoid of all emotion. Chloe wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a dark smudge on her pale skin. My parents are living there, she whispered. And my sister and her 2 kids moved into the guest house last year. The guest house. Liam's voice cracked. There's a guest house? We used some of the money to build it, Chloe admitted, her voice shrinking. And to renovate the kitchen. I sank into my chair, a profound weariness washing over me. For 2 years, I had made excuses for my son's distance. He's busy, he's building an empire, he has his own life. I'd respected his independence, even as it left a void in my own life. But all this time, he thought he was providing for me. He thought I was safe, comfortable, and secure in a beautiful cottage by a lake. He had tried to be a good son. Mom, Liam said, his voice breaking. He knelt beside my chair, his handsome face etched with a pain so deep it mirrored my own. Mom, I am so sorry. I trusted her. I thought you had everything you needed. I never would have let you struggle like that. I looked at my son, the successful man who had once been a little boy promising to buy me a castle when he grew up. He had tried to keep that promise. And the woman he had chosen to share his life with had not only stolen the castle, but had robbed us both of the peace that gift was meant to bring. How much, Chloe? I asked, my eyes fixed on her. How much of my money did you and your family take? She was silent for a long moment, calculating. All of it, she finally whispered. $48,000 in monthly stipends, plus a lakeside cottage now complete with a guest house and a renovated kitchen, likely worth hundreds of thousands more. Chloe's entire family had been living a life of ease and comfort on the foundation of my struggle. Liam stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. Chloe, go to the bedroom. Pack a bag. I want you out of my house tonight. Liam, please, she begged, reaching for his arm. He recoiled as if her touch were fire. We can fix this. I'll get a job. I will pay her back, I swear. Pay her back with what? He said, his voice flat. The money you'd earn in a lifetime wouldn't cover the interest on the trust you've broken. I watched my daughter-in-law's world collapse, and I felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. No pity, no satisfaction, just the cold, hard truth. She had smiled at me, called me mom, and all the while, her family was living in my house, spending my money. As Chloe's broken sobs filled the small apartment, I knew this Thanksgiving would be seared into my memory forever. It was the day I learned that the deepest betrayals often come with the most beautiful smiles. After Chloe's tearful and futile departure, a hired car whisking her away into the cold November night, my apartment felt cavernous. The lingering scent of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie, once a symbol of love and family, now seemed like a cruel mockery. The silence was thick with the ghosts of unspoken truths and shattered trust. Liam, pacing my small living room like a caged panther, wanted to call his lawyer, his private investigator, the police, everyone. I held up a hand. Wait, Liam. Not yet. He stopped, his face a mask of anguish and fury. Mom, she committed fraud. Identity theft. We need to act now. I know, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. But a thief who steals a loaf of bread is different from one who empties the entire bakery. We need to know the full scope of what she did. We need to see the whole picture before we make a single move. For 2 years, I had been a passive character in a story Chloe was writing. Now, I would be the one to turn the pages. The next morning, for the first time in my memory, I called my little mending shop and told my first client of the day that I had a family emergency. Liam returned to my apartment not with flowers or apologies, but with something far more valuable, a banker's box overflowing with files and his laptop. We spread the contents across my oak dining table, the very same spot where the devastating revelation had unfolded. The irony was not lost on me. The first document we examined was a high-quality scan of the deed to the cottage. There it was, Alara Vance. The signature was a decent forgery, but it wasn't mine. Look, I said, pointing a trembling finger. The loop on my E is always open at the top, like it's taking a breath. This one is closed. And the V in Vance. I always give it a little flourish at the end. This is blunt. Liam pulled up a photo of a recent birthday card I'd sent him. Side by side, the forgery was clear. She had practiced, but she hadn't perfected it. She traced it from something, Liam muttered, his voice raw. Something she found in my office. Next, we tackled the bank records. The fraudulent account was with a large, impersonal national bank I'd never used. Liam made a call, but they stonewalled him, citing privacy regulations. The account is in your name, Mom. You'll have to go in person. So we went. Clutching my driver's license and social security card like talismans, I walked into the cold, marble-floored lobby of a bank that felt like a foreign country. The bank manager, a kind woman named Ms. Albright, looked at my ID and then at her screen with a deepening frown. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice hushed with concern. "This account was opened online 2 years ago. The mailing address is a P.O. box in Northwood, and the contact number isn't the one on your file here." She showed me the digital signature card. It was the same blunt, closed forgery. "This is a classic case of identity theft," she said softly. "You need to file a police report." But we weren't finished. Liam, accessing his personal financial server on his laptop, began to cross-reference every transfer he had ever intended for me. The picture that emerged was more insidious than we could have imagined. The monthly stipends were just the start. There was a $750 transfer for emergency dental work I'd never had. A $1,200 transfer for new eyeglasses and hearing aids I'd never needed. A $2,500 Christmas bonus that had vanished into the same fraudulent account. Each transfer was preceded by an email or a call from Chloe, expressing concern for my well-being and suggesting Liam send a little extra. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I was almost afraid of the answer. Liam's fingers flew across the calculator app on his phone. He looked up, his face pale. "Mom, with the stipends and the additional funds, it's $64,000. $64,000. The number was so large it felt unreal. It was a lifetime of security, of peace of mind, of small comforts and dignities she had stolen, dollar by dollar. Next, we drove to the private mail facility in Northwood. It was a sterile, anonymous place in a strip mall. The box had been rented under my name, paid for in cash for 2 years, and recently closed. She was covering her tracks, Liam said, his jaw tight. On the drive back to my apartment, a chilling thought occurred to me. Liam, how did she get my social security number? My mother's maiden name? All the details she would have needed to open that account and forge my identity so completely. He was silent for a long, heavy moment. "I keep a fireproof safe in my home office," he said, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. "It has all our family's important documents. Birth certificates, passports, your information." She would have had access to it at any time. The betrayal was no longer just about money. This was a calculated, systematic violation. Chloe hadn't just stumbled upon an opportunity, she had hunted for it. She had studied me, my signature, my life, all for the purpose of plundering it. That evening, surrounded by a mountain of evidence, Liam looked at me, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I feel like such a fool. I gave her everything, my complete trust. And the worst part is, she's the one who encouraged me to do all this in the first place." That detail landed like a stone in my gut. She had encouraged it. He nodded, reading my thoughts. "A few months after Dad died, she sat me down. She said she was worried about you being alone, about you managing financially. She said it would be a wonderful, loving gesture for me to help you, to give you the security you deserved. She even volunteered to handle the logistics with grace to take the burden off me. I closed my eyes, the full, monstrous weight of Chloe's manipulation settling upon me. She had painted herself as the compassionate, caring daughter-in-law, all while weaving a web to ensnare the very generosity she was proposing. "The cottage, too," he continued, his voice thick with disgust. "She found the listing. Said she remembered you talking about wanting to live near the water again. She said it would be good for your spirit. She negotiated the sale. She oversaw the paperwork with the realtor. She orchestrated the entire gift. Chloe hadn't just stolen from me. She had used my son's love for me as her primary tool. She had made him feel like a noble, devoted son while she bled us both dry." As Liam began carefully repacking the files to take to his lawyer, I sat alone in my small, worn living room. This cramped space, with its drafty windows and aging furniture, was never supposed to have been my reality for these past 2 years. I was meant to be in a cozy cottage, watching the seasons change on a lake, free from worry. Instead, Chloe's parents were likely enjoying a lakeside sunset at that very moment, their comfort bought with my hardship. But as the initial shock and pain began to recede, they were replaced by something else, a cold, hard resolve. Chloe had stolen more than a house and money. She had stolen 2 years of my dignity, my peace, and the quiet comfort of knowing I was cared for. Tomorrow, we would begin the process of taking it all back. And I would not be a passive victim any longer. I would be there for every step, not for revenge, but for reclamation. For the first time in 2 years, I knew the truth of my circumstances. And that knowledge, however bitter, felt like the first step toward mending my own broken life. The call from Mr. Davies, Liam's attorney, came on a crisp Monday morning. I was at my sewing machine, meticulously repairing the silk lining of a vintage coat, my hands moving with the familiar, practiced grace of my trade. "Mrs. Vance," the lawyer's voice was somber but firm. "We need to meet. The investigator's initial findings are extensive. This is significantly more complex than we first believed." Liam picked me up from my apartment, his face etched with a sleepless tension. The easy confidence he usually wore like a well-tailored suit was gone, replaced by a grim determination that aged him. He had thrown himself into this battle with the full force of his intellect and resources, but the personal toll was evident. This wasn't a hostile takeover, it was a family tragedy, and it was breaking his heart. In the polished mahogany conference room of Mr. Davies's law firm, a thick file lay on the table between us. It felt like a gravestone marking the death of our family as we knew it. "Chloe wasn't just siphoning off the funds your son sent, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Davies began, his expression grave. She was running a multifaceted fraud operation using your stolen identity." The room seemed to contract around me. He explained that Chloe had used my pristine credit and personal information to open not one, but 4 credit cards in my name. She had maxed them out on luxury goods, spa treatments, and even contributions to the very charities she claimed to be organizing events for. She had also taken out a personal loan for $15,000 from an online lender, again, in my name. "And then there's the issue of taxes," Mr. Davies continued, sliding a stack of official-looking letters across the table. "The IRS has been trying to reach you. It seems Chloe filed fraudulent tax returns for the past 2 years, claiming you as a dependent while also reporting the income from Liam's stipends, which, of course, you never received. According to the federal government, you are currently under investigation for significant tax fraud." I felt the air leave my lungs. Tax fraud? But I filed my taxes every year, reporting the small income from my mending business. "It's all I've had." "We understand that," Mr. Davies said gently. "But the IRS sees a completely different picture, one that Chloe painted. From their perspective, you have been deliberately hiding substantial income." Liam's hands were balled into tight fists on the table. "What's the total?" "The full amount she stole." Mr. Davies consulted a spreadsheet. "Between the stipends, the extra funds, the maxed-out credit cards, the personal loan, and the fraudulent tax refunds she pocketed, we are looking at a figure just north of $110,000. The number was an obscenity. It was more money than I had earned in the last 5 years combined. It was a fortune built on my name, my reputation, my quiet life. "And the cottage?" I asked, my voice thin. "That's the one silver lining, in a legal sense," the lawyer replied. "The deed, though forged, is in your name. Legally, the property is yours. Her family members are, for all intents and purposes, squatters. We can have them removed." I thought of Chloe's parents, whom I'd met at her wedding. They had seemed like simple, kind people, overwhelmed by their daughter's glittering new life. I wondered if they knew. Could they possibly have lived in a beautiful lakeside home, their lives cushioned by a constant flow of money, and never once questioned its source? "Where is Chloe now?" Liam asked, his voice a low growl. "She's at the cottage with her parents," Mr. Davies confirmed. "Our investigator has been monitoring the property. She's been there ever since she left your home on Thanksgiving." "So she ran straight back to the nest she built with my mother's stolen money," Liam said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Of course she did. That afternoon, we drove to Whispering Pines Lake. I needed to see it. I needed to stand on the ground that was supposed to have been my sanctuary. As we turned onto the private lane, the trees opened up, and I saw it for the first time. I drew in a sharp breath. It was more beautiful than I had imagined. A cedar-shingled cottage with a stone chimney and wide, welcoming windows that looked out over the sparkling water. Manicured flower beds, now dormant for the winter, lined a stone walkway. This was the peace Robert and I had dreamed of for our later years. This was the gift my son had tried to give me. And seeing it now, knowing it was infested with lies, felt like a desecration. Chloe's father, a man with tired eyes and a stooped posture, answered the door. His face fell the moment he saw us. "Liam." "Elara," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. We knew you would come." Chloe appeared behind him. She looked diminished, stripped of her usual gloss. She wore a simple gray sweatshirt, her hair was tied back messily, and her face was pale and puffy. "Elara," she whispered, her voice cracking. I am so sorry. I looked at her, at the woman who had smiled at me over holiday dinners while my name was being used to rack up debt and deceive the government. The cold resolve in my heart solidified into steel. Are you Chloe? I asked, my voice steady. Are you sorry for what you did, or are you just sorry that you got caught? The tears began to fall then, but I was unmoved. I had seen her tears before. They were just another tool in her arsenal. It spiraled, she sobbed. It started with one small thing to help my parents, and then it just got bigger and bigger. I never meant for any of this to happen. You never meant to open 4 credit cards in my mother's name? Liam's voice was like stone. You never meant to commit tax fraud? You had hundreds of opportunities to stop, Chloe. At any point, you could have come to me, to us, and confessed. But you chose to lie again and again. Chloe's mother, a frail-looking woman with her daughter's blue eyes, appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. We didn't know the extent of it, she pleaded, her voice trembling. Chloe told us Liam was just being incredibly generous, that he had insisted on buying us the cottage to help us get back on our feet after the business failed. We never dreamed. The IRS is investigating me for tax evasion because of what your daughter did, I said, my words dropping like stones into the heavy silence. Because she filed fraudulent returns in my name, I could be facing criminal charges. Your comfort these past 2 years could cost me my freedom. Chloe's mother let out a horrified gasp and staggered back, covering her mouth with a hand. Oh, dear God, Chloe. What have you done? But Chloe had no answers, only more tears and a litany of empty excuses. She had 2 years to build a foundation of truth, and instead, she had built a palace of lies. And now, the walls were crashing down. Mr. Davies, who had followed us in a separate car, stepped forward, his briefcase in hand. Mr. and Mrs. Stevens, he said, addressing Chloe's parents with professional courtesy. I am serving you with a notice to vacate the premises. You have 30 days to remove yourselves and your personal belongings. The property, and everything in it that was purchased with fraudulent funds, belongs to Mrs. Vance. As I watched the dawning horror on the faces of Chloe's family, her sister had emerged from the guest house, 2 small children hiding behind her legs, I felt an unexpected emotion, not triumph, but a profound and weary sadness. This was the wreckage of one person's greed. The Cedar Creek police will be here in the morning to place Chloe under arrest, Mr. Davies stated calmly. I strongly advise that she turns herself in voluntarily. Chloe's eyes flew to Liam, wide with a final, desperate appeal. Liam, please. Don't let this happen. I'll pay it all back. I'll work for the rest of my life. Please. He just shook his head, a look of infinite sadness on his face. There's no us to fix this, Chloe. You built this prison for yourself. Now you have to live in it. As we walked away from the cottage, I took one last look at the home that should have been mine. It would be mine soon, but it felt tainted, haunted by the deceit it had housed. In the car, driving away from the lake, Liam reached over and took my hand. His was cold as ice. Mom, I swear to you, I will make this right. I will spend whatever it takes to fix this, to take care of you, to give you the life you were always meant to have. I squeezed his hand, my heart aching for his pain. You already tried to, my love, I said softly. It's not your fault the gift was stolen. But as we drove back toward the familiar, cramped streets of my neighborhood, I knew that our lives were irrevocably altered. The confrontation was over. Now, justice would have its turn. And after that, perhaps, we could finally begin to mend. The divorce was finalized on a bleak Tuesday in February. Snow fell in wet, heavy flakes outside the courthouse windows, mirroring the somber mood inside. I sat on a polished wooden bench next to Liam, my hands folded in my lap, waiting. Mr. Davies emerged from the judge's chambers a few minutes later, his expression unreadable. It's done, he announced, taking a seat beside us. The marriage is officially dissolved. Chloe signed everything. With her criminal trial pending, she had no leverage to contest. Liam let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 3 months. What about her sentence? Given the mountain of evidence and her full confession, the prosecutor has recommended a plea deal. 2 years in a state correctional facility for fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. She'll likely serve 18 months with good behavior. 18 months. It felt like an impossibly short time to pay for the wreckage she had caused. Her family vacated the cottage last week, Mr. Davies continued. They were surprisingly cooperative. I believe they are as appalled by their daughter's actions as anyone. All funds in the fraudulent accounts have been frozen by the court and will be released to you, Mrs. Vance, as part of the restitution order. In the weeks that followed, My life became a whirlwind of legal appointments, financial advisors, and boxes. Liam, free from the toxic influence of Chloe, threw himself into making things right with a ferocious, guilt-ridden energy. He hired a team of forensic accountants to meticulously unravel the tangled web Chloe had woven with the IRS, ensuring my name was cleared of all wrongdoing. He personally oversaw the transfer of the cottage's title and utilities. Most significantly, the successful, perpetually busy executive was replaced by a son who simply showed up. He'd stop by my apartment after work with groceries, call just to see how my day was, and sit with me for hours while we sorted through a lifetime of belongings. "You don't have to do all this, Liam," I told him one afternoon as he carefully wrapped one of my mother's porcelain teacups in newspaper. He paused, his hands stilling on the delicate china. "Mom, for 2 years, I was living in a fantasy while you were living in a nightmare. I thought I was taking care of you, but I wasn't even paying attention. I'm not going to make that mistake again." I understood that his meticulous care was a form of atonement, a way of mending his own bruised conscience. Trust, once so thoroughly shattered, is not easily repaired, especially trust in one's own judgment. The day I moved into the cottage on Whispering Pines Lake was surreal. The house was objectively beautiful, the view of the frozen lake breathtaking. But it felt haunted by a life that wasn't mine. Chloe's family had left it spotless, but their presence lingered like a faint, unpleasant perfume. The sleek, modern furniture in the living room, the state-of-the-art appliances in the renovated kitchen, all of it felt like evidence in a crime scene. "We can sell all of it," Liam said, sensing my discomfort as we stood in the center of the large, open-plan living area. "We can hire a designer, paint every wall, start completely fresh. Whatever you want, Mom. This is your home now. You should feel at peace here." I appreciated his sentiment, but I knew that no amount of new paint could erase the memory of how this piece had been stolen and then returned, scarred and altered. The restitution process was slow and complicated. The forensic accountants worked for months to track every dollar Chloe had stolen and spent. When the final report came, my new financial advisor, a patient woman named Sarah, sat down with me and Liam. "The good news, Mrs. Vance," she said, "is that once all the assets are liquidated and the funds are recovered, the total restitution will be approximately $140,000. That includes the original stolen funds, accrued interest, and damages awarded for the identity theft." I stared at the number on the paper, my mind struggling to comprehend it. That amount of money could have bought my little apartment building outright. It was a fortune that felt both abstract and deeply, intimately tied to my pain. It was the price of my stolen dignity. The hardest part, in many ways, was the quiet hum of community gossip. In a town the size of Cedar Creek, Chloe's spectacular fall from grace was the story of the year. People's reactions were a strange tapestry of pity, suspicion, and morbid curiosity. Some friends were wonderfully supportive, bringing by casseroles and offering help. Others looked at me with a hint of accusation in their eyes, as if I should have known, as if my ignorance was a character flaw. The most jarring were those who treated the whole affair as if I'd won the lottery. "Well, it all worked out for the best in the end, didn't it?" a neighbor commented cheerfully as I was getting my mail one day. "You've certainly landed on your feet." I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and explain that having your identity plundered and your trust violated is not a winning lottery ticket. The house and the money were not a prize, they were reparations for a deep and personal wound. But I just smiled faintly and walked back inside. The first night I spent alone in the cottage, I sat on the screened-in porch, a new addition I was told Chloe's father had built with his own hands. I wrapped myself in one of Robert's old flannel blankets and watched the last light fade from the frozen lake. The silence here was different from the silence in my apartment. It was vast, ancient, and filled with the whisper of the wind in the pines. It felt lonely. My phone rang. It was Liam. He had called every evening since I'd moved in. "How are you holding up, Mom? Is it feeling any more like home?" I looked out at the expanse of white and gray, at the stark beauty of the winter landscape. "I feel grateful," I said, the words forming slowly. "And sad. And angry. And overwhelmed. All at once." "That sounds about right," he said softly. "You know, I've been thinking about what Chloe said that day, that she never meant for it to go so far." "What about it?" I asked, pulling the blanket tighter. "I think that part was probably true. I think she started with one lie and then had to tell 1,000 more to cover it up. But that doesn't excuse it. It makes it worse. She had 2 years of chances to tell the truth, and every single day she chose to keep lying." He was right. Her crime wasn't a single act of desperation. It was a long, sustained campaign of deception. She had looked me in the eye, hugged me, listened to my worries, all while actively being the source of them. She seemed so proud, I mused, when she would talk about the renovations, the guest house. She was proud of what she was building with stolen money. She wasn't just stealing from you, Mom, Liam said, his voice heavy. She stole from me, too. She stole my peace of mind. She stole the relationship we should have had. After we hung up, I walked through the silent, beautiful house that was now legally and financially mine. It was a gilded cage, filled with comforts I didn't know how to enjoy. That night, I slept in the large, comfortable master bed, but my dreams were of my small, cramped apartment, a place where I knew every creak and groan, a place that was mine not because of a court order, but because of the life I had lived within its walls. But as I drifted to sleep, listening to the wind howl over the frozen lake, I realized that this exhaustion was a new kind. It wasn't the bone-deep weariness of struggle and worry. It was the exhaustion that comes after a long and brutal war has finally been won. The territory was secured. Now came the long, slow work of rebuilding, of making this strange, new land feel like home. A year later, I stood on that same screened-in porch, but the view, and the woman watching it, had been transformed. The ice on the lake had long since melted, replaced by the deep, calming blue of summer. The porch, once filled with unfamiliar wicker furniture, now held my own worn armchair and a small table where I took my morning tea. The sterile house had slowly, organically, become my home. I had filled it with the things I loved, bookshelves overflowing with novels, pots of vibrant geraniums, and framed photos of Robert, of a young Liam, of a life built on love, not lies. My morning routine had become a cherished ritual. Tea on the porch at sunrise, a walk along the shoreline, an hour spent tending to the small vegetable garden I'd planted where a manicured but soulless flower bed had once been. These were the quiet luxuries that wealth had given me, not fast cars or designer clothes, but time. Time to breathe, time to think, time to simply be. Liam's car crunched on the gravel driveway, right on time for our Sunday brunch. This weekly tradition had evolved from his initial, frantic efforts to atone into a comfortable, easy rhythm that had mended the frayed edges of our relationship. "Morning, Mom," he called, entering through the unlocked back door. He carried a white paper bag from the Cedar Creek Bakery. I brought the almond croissants. I smiled, placing 2 of my hand-painted ceramic plates on the small kitchen island. "You're going to spoil me, Liam." "Good," he said, grinning. "You've got about 60 years of being unspoiled to make up for. Besides, a significant portion of the town's economy now depends on you enjoying your retirement. Old Mr. Henderson at the hardware store asked me if you needed any more birdseed." It was true. The town that had once whispered about my misfortune now seemed to have collectively adopted me. My story, which had started as a sordid drama, had somehow become a local legend of resilience and quiet victory. "Any more news about Chloe?" I asked as we sat down to eat. Liam shook his head. "She was denied parole last month. Mr. Davies says she'll serve the full 18 months. Her parents send me a Christmas card. They're still in Arizona with her aunt. I think they're trying to build a new life from the rubble." "How do you feel about that?" he asked, his gaze searching mine. A year ago, the thought of Chloe might have stirred a hornet's nest of anger and pain. Now, it was more like a distant echo. "I feel detached," I said honestly. "I don't wish her ill, but I don't waste my time wishing her well either. Her choices led her to where she is. My only hope is that she uses the time to understand the profound harm she caused, not just to us, but to her own family." I had come to understand that forgiveness wasn't a gift I needed to give Chloe. The real forgiveness had been for myself, for not seeing the truth, for being so trusting. And for Liam, for being so expertly deceived by the woman he loved. "I have some news of my own," Liam said, a nervous energy about him I hadn't seen in a long time. I waited, my teacup poised in my hand. "I've been seeing someone," he said. "Her name is Sarah." My heart gave a little jolt. It was the name of my financial advisor. Liam laughed, seeing my expression. "Not the same Sarah. Just a wonderful coincidence. This Sarah, she's a history professor at the university. She's quiet and kind, and she'd rather spend an afternoon in a dusty library than on a yacht." He paused. "She knows the whole story. And her first reaction was to ask how you were doing." A genuine smile spread across my face. "She sounds lovely, Liam. I'd like you to meet her. If you're ready." "I've been ready for a long time," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm ready for you to be happy." After Liam left, I took my customary walk down to the small dock I had built. A family of loons had taken up residence in the cove, and their haunting calls had become the soundtrack to my summer. I thought about the woman I was 2 years ago, her world circumscribed by worry, her hands chapped from work and worry. She would not recognize this woman, standing tall in the sunshine, her life her own. Chloe, in her destructive greed, had inadvertently given me a gift I never would have sought for myself. She had forced a reckoning that, in its painful aftermath, had brought my son back to me, not as a distant benefactor, but as a true and present companion. She had given me this house, this lake, this life of quiet contemplation. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I sat down with a sketch pad and a set of pencils and began to draw the view from my porch. The lines were unsteady at first, the hands that had only known needles and thread for so long fumbling with the unfamiliar graphite. But as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the water, an image began to take shape. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Sarah is nervous to meet you. She's afraid she can't live up to the woman who survived a real-life crime novel." I smiled and typed back, "Tell her the only thing she has to do is make my son smile. She's already succeeded." As darkness fell, blanketing the lake in a peaceful silence, I felt a sense of profound and settled contentment. Victoria had tried to steal my future, to write me into a story of poverty and neglect. But she had failed. In the end, I had taken back the pen. I was the author of my own life now, and every day, I wrote a new page filled with peace, with healing, and with the quiet, resilient joy of a life mended and made whole again. And now, as my story has reached you, wherever you are in the world, I find myself curious. What would you have done in my place? Have the threads of your own life ever been so unexpectedly tangled? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. In the meantime, I hope my journey has offered you a small measure of inspiration. There are always more stories to be told, and perhaps the next one will surprise you just as much as my own life surprised me.